All right, so this is IETF 96. If you're not here for the IETF, you are in an interesting conference anyway. And we're going to do a technical and administrative plenary. We don't have a huge amount of program. We're just going to go through a few short topics, and most of the time is reserved for discussion, for you guys to bring up topics to discuss. And just at the beginning, I'm going to go through a few things here. So first of all, I really liked the social event yesterday. Good food, good drinks, good company, but I in particular liked the park, the garden, and there were lots of IETFers walking around and standing by the lake and so forth. It was seemed to be enjoyed by everybody. Although one thing that I was wondering a little bit about is that there's all these animals around in the park, and also here at the IETF. I don't know if the you missed. So I don't know if the IEOC knows that there are some rats in the building, for instance. And the other thing that I wanted to just observe, that I stopped by the NOC, and they have a new network monitoring service, which is great. And here it is on the left. And it's really effective. So for the first time, we actually have implemented the PCP38 in the IETF network. Woohoo! Apparently it was pretty hard. I don't know who specified that. Anyway, so agenda for this. This is the welcome part. We're gonna recognize the host, and they're gonna say a few words. We're going to have updates on hot topics. Most of this has been sent to the mailing list, and we're going to do a very brief recap of some of the highlights or things that we haven't been discussing so much. And you can look at the material on the proceedings page and on IETF at IETF mailing list. But we are going to briefly talk about IETF-wide issues, a little bit more length on administrative topics, IEOC and trust. There's lots of happening at the trust, for instance, and as well as meeting selections that you know of. You're going to get a brief advertisement from NUMCOM, status of the RFC editor format changes, IRTF updates, talk a little bit about IETF funding with some people from ISOC and other organizations. You've seen some of this on the email lists, I believe. And we're going to get IETF 97 welcome. Wrong in the slides here. And then we saw a presentation this week in the routing area from Ross Callan about keeping it simple and the costs of too many standards. We thought that was a very good thing to speak about, and we are going to do that again here. And then we're going to open it up for open microphone session. And before we go to the actual reporting issues piece, I just wanted to recognize the host. So thank you, Juniper. We cannot do these meetings without sponsor and host support, so that's really important. If Tom, Alia, and Kevin come up, and this time we have a few people, a team rather than just one person, and I think that's a really good thing actually, because setting up hosting IETF is actually a big task. So it does require a team, not just one person. So good to see some parts of the team up here.
Okay, thank you. Well, good evening, maybe good afternoon still. So it is our pleasure, it's Juniper's pleasure to have hosted this meeting. I hope you understand we have done our best. We put many, many hours into planning. There are some people in the audience maybe who are on the team too. We had many, many people. If you have just a moment to either stand, raise your hand from the Juniper group, or maybe they haven't there. There we go. Ross, Gert Grammel, Adrian. I don't know if I see Adrian out there. Anyway, it was our pleasure. I hope that those of you who went to the social event last night, Yari mentioned about the animals. I was looking for the happy Berlin nerd bear. Did anybody see it there? I hope. And you know it's a nerd bear because he's wearing glasses. So it's also Juniper's recognition of the original first IETF t-shirt, the Nerds in Paradise t-shirt. We thought we should have a nerd bear for this t-shirt. So Kevin Walker is, I don't think, in the audience yet, so let me just say that tomorrow, if you are able to attend the technical talk, Kevin Walker, our security CTO, will be speaking at 1 in Potsdam 1, and we would like to all invite you to come and hear his talk. So again, we thank you all for coming to IETF, and we thank you and the IETF for allowing us the privilege of hosting. Thank you.
Okay, don't go yet. So we wanted to recognize you with the plaque.
Thank you.
All right. So, a brief report about IETF-wide topics. Can talk about the meeting and participants, a little update on how to follow what the ISG, the steering group, does. Mention our professional behavior standards. We'd like to do that at every meeting. And give a list of experiments that are ongoing, not the technical ones, but the ones that we're sort of process-wise experimenting with. And there's far more material in the online report. Go take a look at that. Notable events in this IETF, a report from our retreat, a list of new, changed, or closed working groups, 5 new ones, and changed 4 and closed 6. Have 8 under consideration in various stages of the process. And of course, it's not always certain that these result in a working group, but we're at least looking at that. We have a few non-working group mailing lists. We've not received appeals in this period. We talk about the status of the IANA stewardship transition from the IETF perspective. Another mistake on the slides. Give you a status of the IETF website renewal, which, by the way, we wanted to have live for this meeting. We're not quite there. So in a few weeks' time, you will be able to test the new website and see how it feels and provide feedback. Looking forward to that. And also list some ongoing comment periods on various things that we're asking the community about. And then there's a bunch of other reports besides the one that I sent. There's an RC editor report, secretariat report, IANA report, NOC report, although I'm not sure that's quite yet up there. It will be. Hackathon report, do take a look at that. Lots of interesting things happened there. And as usual, not just right now during the meetings, but all the time I try to report things together with my colleagues on happenings around the IETF and thoughts on various kinds of topics. The meeting and the participants. This is one of the most well-attended meetings in recent years, and I hesitate a little bit to say anything firmer than that, but we do have a fair number of people here on site. Many current and new topics that have high interest from the IETF community and outside. If anybody wasn't a quick buff today, it was, I think, this room and maybe slightly shrunk size, but it was packed and people were sitting on the floor. So that was very, very interesting from everybody's perspective. And that's just one example. And of course, we have the hackathon. Do read the report. 150 people, more than ever, plus various kinds of other events also, code sprint and interop events and so forth. Besides that, and cool stuff happening at the hackathon. That's one example. 7 TLS 1.3 implementations were tested against each other and found interoperable. That's fairly significant, I'd say. Participants, I checked a couple of hours ago. On site, we had 1,396 participants, roughly 300 newcomers, and close to what we had in IETF 93. 61 countries. This data is from yesterday, and actually had somewhere. Let me take my notes. So I wanted to provide information about remote participants. We have about just slightly under 300 remote participants. Top 3: US 70, India 60, Brazil 50. Nice. Okay, so the IHC, we're trying to, execute whatever you guys feel we should be doing in terms of standards, and the question is, how do you know what we actually are up to? And just wanted to provide an update on that, and sort of regular information about how you can see what we're doing. Obviously, all the last calls, new work proposals, approvals, discusses, you've been there, you see that. It's part of your daily discussions. I did want to highlight that the IEC telechats are open for observers. So do follow them. They're relatively quick businesses, unless there's some big topic to discuss about a particular document, for instance, or otherwise. And if you were the sort of owner or author of the document, it may be interesting to follow that, particularly if you expect some discussion of that nature. Although most of our discussion of the documents does actually happen with the authors on email lists, as we normally do. We did implement this thing. We have something called the BOF coordination calls. It's just before every IETF, where we decide that, okay, we have these proposals for new work at the IETF, which ones of them should actually get a slot at the meeting to discuss. And of course, the community is the one who decides eventually if the work is going to go ahead, but we do this pre-filtering that this seems ready to have that discussion. And that's something that we do together with the IAB, who helps us quite a bit with understanding, like, where these things are. And we are now also publishing the minutes from those coordination calls. Professional behavior, I just wanted to highlight that we have expectations, how you behave at IETF meetings or mailing lists and so forth. We have a code of conduct, RC 71, 74. We have a anti-harassment policy issued by the IEC a couple of years ago. We have a new BCP for dealing with harassment cases, creating something called the Ombuds team, RC 7776. And here's the URL for the Ombuds team. They're friendly people. You can contact them for help, or if you just need someone to discuss, do contact them. And I suppose you're in the room. Maybe you can stand up. Yeah. Over there. Thank you. And it really is, by the way, very important that you guys volunteer for the various things that we do in this community. We don't have huge amount of resources to basically no resources to hire anybody to do various kinds of things. We are a volunteer organization, so you want something done, it may be a good idea to volunteer. So thank you for this effort. A list of some experiments that we're running. Just wanted to highlight that. The IETF discussion list is a high volume discussion list with variable set of topics and basically no limits on topics, because it's the default list for other topics. And we've had some issues around how the discussion goes there. So a few months ago, we implemented the facilitators scheme, which is basically a few people helping guide the discussion. So that's ongoing. And the hackathon, usually we've been running that for a while now, 2 years, I think. And it's before the IETF on Saturday and Sunday. And now we're running also that throughout the week, or at least we reserve some space in the lounge throughout the week. And hopefully you can use that if you need to hack more on your project. And then as you undoubtedly have noticed, we have this meeting starting time experiment going on. We started that in Buenos Aires. We decided to continue that here. Of course, eager to understand if this works well for you or not. And there's, obviously there's multiple parameters in this, meeting scheduling thing, and how many, what's the total length of the meeting, and how much of it is reserved for sort of formal working group meeting time, and how much of it is sort of free time where most of you will probably be talking to your colleagues and design teams and hallway conversation, which is also important. And then exactly where do you place that during the day? So please provide feedback on that. So I think that's it for my report. And if I can ask Leslie, Ray, and Tobias to come up on stage and talk about the administrative topics.
Good evening. Let's see here. So this is an overview of what we're going to discuss tonight. Berlin has been particularly well attended. This is great. So we're happy with the attendance and the paid attendance. We have a lot of remote participants here. 16 universities are represented. When we were in Buenos Aires, there were 40, for example. 123 first-timers. And you can see the numbers from India and Brazil that I captured much earlier in the day. But we're getting folks from around the world. We're getting some repeat visitors as well. So visas, a lot were issued. Half of those to China, more than half. And you can see the registration revenues and the sponsorship revenues kind of balance each other out. So we're basically meeting our budget. Expenses we'll learn more about later. So Tom mentioned the Tech Talk on Thursday. I met with Kevin last night at the social, and he's been at Juniper for about a year, and for 5 years before that, he was a CISO for Walmart Online. And he's very passionate about security, and he has some things to say. So I would very much encourage you to attend. If this is a topic of interest to you, you'll enjoy what Kevin has to say. So tomorrow afternoon at 1 o'clock. I also want to thank Juniper, Tom Walsh, and the team. I know they've been working for months to get this thing ready, and we were meeting over the last 12 weeks or so, run up to the meeting with Tom and Aaliyah and Ross. And it's a great group, and we appreciate all the work that you've done for the meeting. Hackathon, here are the sponsors. Huawei is the sponsor for the hackathon. They're doing all the 3 hackathons this year. It's also supported by Cisco DevNet, and Barry Lieber is the co-chair for Huawei, and Charles Eckel is the co-chair for Cisco. And it also has additional infrastructure support from ONOS. Bits and Bytes, I hope you'll be there Thursday night. And we have a bunch of tables there for folks, and here are some of the folks that are going to be there. Connectivity sponsors, we had 3 that were hooking us up for this meeting, and we thank them for their connectivity. And additional sponsors, Desix and Berlin. Thank you. I want to thank the Code Sprinters, and this is the group that this is pretty much a pretty stable group. We'd like to get some additional folks to attend. This is on a Saturday. If you'd like to come and help develop the tools that the community uses, this is the place to be. And this is the group that works in the NOC. From all the volunteers, led by Jim Martin, and you recognize these names. They've been here and doing this for years, and they're what makes the network a rock and stable. The Veroland team, and then the Meet Echo group, providing for our remote participation. Thank you all. And now the heavy stuff. Leslie?
Thanks, Ray. Thanks for leaving me all the fun stuff. Legal matters, I wanted to alert you that there is a new lawsuit filed in which the Internet Society is a defendant relating to IETF activities. It's Todd Glassy and Michael McNeil versus Microsemi Corporation et al. And you can find the details at that URL. And I intend to say exactly nothing else about it because it's an ongoing legal matter. Yes, meetings, as Yari mentioned. So IETF 100, I think that most people have had the opportunity to follow along with where we are with that. There was a long public discussion about the choice of location when we announced it at IETF 95. And in terms of near-term actions, the IAOC reviewed alternative site availability, other potential impacts of moving it, consulted with the ISG, was part of the ongoing discussion on the mailing list. But the long and the short of it is that we've decided to keep the IETF 100 in Singapore, but you really should look at the detailed explanation from the IAOC that is at that URL to get the full sense of the many things that we considered, the many things that your colleagues here have had to say about the situation, in particular because that's step one, and now we're on to step two and beyond to do the larger review of our guidelines and processes to make sure that our meeting planning works to everyone's satisfaction going forward. So for that, we are seeking to improve guidance. The IOC's job is to find the locations that fits the requirements of the IETF and, where possible, the IETF's desires. So unfortunately, both of these meetings, the meetings I'm going to reference now, are already done for this week. But you should be aware of the meeting venue working group now that has been established in the general area. It is focused on refining the IETF's stated requirements for meeting venues. And also, as a step, the IAOC has begun circulating lists of potential locations before we actually sign the contracts, before we start engaging in negotiations, so that you have the opportunity to identify if there are any barriers to entry, barriers to success, access, and inclusiveness that we may have overlooked. So those are announcements that are coming out sporadically as we're planning for the future, and do please respond as you see them. The other meeting that happened this week that was informational was the meeting. Wow. I'm not going to say that too many times fast. Run by Alyssa Cooper with some experts in human rights. Very informative session, and I would urge you to have a look at the recording from that session to get more information. So another piece of things that we wanted to update you on, transparency update. We did do a BCP 101 compliance internal review. Just to make sure that we actually were disclosing the things that we said that we knew we were supposed to disclose. And the key areas include the financial side of things, process in terms of rules and procedures and guidelines, and any actions and reviews. All of this is, according to BCP 101, subject to any reasonable confidentiality obligations approved by the IOC. This is tricky stuff because we are doing business things. We're doing business things on behalf of the IETF. And it's not, there are any number of reasons why it's not good for the IETF community for us to expose stuff. So apart from that, other transparency issues that have been taken care of, small details have been taken care of through the publication of information and links on the IOC website. It's an ongoing process. And we're aware of it. One of the key areas that we keep coming back and having discussions on, of course, is hotel contracts. The most contentious area in terms of transparency and disclosure has to do with why don't you go ahead and publish the hotel contracts? Why don't you publish the key material in those contracts? We had a discussion about this at the IOC retreat, and it is the opinion of our professional support staff, the people who actually do this for us on the ground and across the globe, that it would undermine our business position to do so, and even our contract template would significantly weaken our negotiating position with the venues. So we are trying to pull out some of the not so sticky bits and have put material up on the website. There's the URL. But it is the IOC consensus that it is reasonable to keep hotel contracts as a whole confidential at this time. One more thing, committees. So the IOC, as you probably already know, and you will have the opportunity to see in a little bit, is pretty small. It's structured to be an oversight committee. 4 of the 9 members are ex officio, i.e. they have full-time other commitments in this space. There is the IETF Administrative Director, Ray, who is non-voting, and the NOMCOM, IBISG, and ISOC appoint the remainder of the members. So this is my cue to remind everybody that the NOMCOM process is in play. Please do, if you want to help diversify this committee, please do volunteer. The last time there was an open call for an open IAOC position was the ISG this year, and they had exactly 1 person who volunteered. And we appreciate that he volunteered, and we're happy to have him continue. But in general, the NOMCOM likes to have a broad spectrum of people to choose from in order to make sure that we get the best committees put together. Because it is such a small group, and because it really has relatively little flex in terms of people's cycles, to get work done, we have committees, and heavy lifting is done by those appointed committees, and they are constituted annually. The list of committees can and does change over time, and the membership in committees is certainly not permanent. So the role of these committees that we've established, that have been established for some time, is to develop materials and make recommendations for IAOC decisions. The decision-making still rests with the IAOC because we are the people who have been put in the seats to be accountable with the various and sundry accountability mechanisms built in. So you can see the details about the particular committees that we have, but we are currently looking for volunteers. If there are people who are interested in helping with the different activities, and the committees that are for which we are particularly interested in additional help are listed below, please send, see the message that I sent to the announce list yesterday, and do send in your name and your particular strengths for the different committees to be considered. We are particularly looking for interest by the 1st of August, and we're hoping to make a decision on and filling out the committee membership by the end of August. I will put in a particular mention of the meetings committee. It is not the case that these committees will never be representative, and because this is such a diverse group anyway, you can't have 2 of every kind. But we would particularly like to have more experience in terms of setting up this size of meeting in Asia. So if you particularly feel you've got expertise on that front, if you've got particular contacts and awareness on that front and are willing to spend some time, please give it some consideration and let us know. So everything else is filed for offline viewing, lots of charts, lots of data. If you want to see it, and I hope you do, please have a look at the proceedings page. Thank you.
And then we'll talk about the trust.
Okay, hello. So I actually did like the bear. I was just wondering where's the beard, but well, that might be something missing for the nerd bear in the future. Maybe he grows one after this meeting or after this trust report. We will see. So we had a few changes also for the IETF trust. Lou Berger was elected as trust treasurer. In the past, we didn't have that, but now we are very happy and thankful that we could convince Lou to take that. George, who is also our IETF attorney, is also confirmed as the trust attorney. This year is a year of change for the trust in a couple of ways. You will see a number of them later. The most important change is that we prepare to assume the responsibility for the IANA IPR. And I guess probably many of you have seen the discussions on the IANA Plan Working Group, the discussions out there in the communities about the transition that's coming up, and also for us as the IETF Trust to take that responsibility. As previously reported, the IETF Trust is willing to hold the intellectual property, and over the next, I think, 2 months, we basically have to execute all of that. The ICANN board, since the last IETF meeting, the ICANN board has voted to accept the plan from the ICG, and NTIA has voiced that it meets its criteria. We are currently working on 3 elements to facilitate that transition. So we have prepared 3 sets of documents and are currently engaging discussions with the communities. The first one is the ICANN IANA IPR assignment to the trust. So we are receiving that IPR into the trust. The second one is the community agreements between the trust and the operational 3 communities, including the IETF. And the third one is the license agreement from the trust to the IANA service provider PTI, meaning that they will do some operational tasks on our behalf. Basically, yeah, we license it to them. Going along with that, we also cleaned up our finance situation a bit more. So we have submitted the filing for tax-exempt status as 501c3. And we also have submitted the files to open a trust-owned bank account in July. And we already are very happy that this will be filled with the first contribution from ISOC to cover the needs of maintaining the trust in 2016. Going forward from this year, we also will publish the trust financial statements separate from the IETF statements. In the past, these were combined, and we did not want to go back into the past to change that, but we do this from this year going forward. They are issued monthly, and you can see them on our webpage. Here's the one for May. As you can see, our budget is not huge. In fact, we expect an annual budget of about 53,000. So in that sense, the trust is very small and humble. The trust agreement, we have also closed trust agreements with ISOC, who very generously contributed the $60,000 for the first year to cover our running expenses for this year. And we approved an administrative services agreement between ISOC and the trust, and also approved an agreement between ISOC and the trust about some administrative support. We also adopted new policies. So we adopted an official conflict of interest policy, which you have seen on the mailing list that we posted, and we adopted the records retention policy in June. Some smaller items, we also, so as I mentioned before, we awarded a contract to Contreras Legal Strategies for drafting the IP agreements in relationship to the IANA transfer, and also we hired a new trademark counsel for the trust. And in the light that Scott is leaving the IUC and also in that function no longer a trustee of the IETF trust, we felt it's important to continue be able to draw upon his experience and expertise, and we closed we made an agreement that he can in the future continue to help us on a pro bono and under NDA. In addition, we updated our trust insurance by a small increase of the insured sum. Any questions? And there's more material later online. Thank you. Questions will be for later.
Okay, thanks, guys. And indeed, we will have a slot to discuss the questions and feedback and other ideas that you may have. And NOMCOM was already mentioned. So Lucy, maybe you can come up and there you are, and talk about the NOMCOM.
Hi all, I'm Lucy Lynch and I am this year's NOMCOM chair. I will be very brief. The NOMCOM has a process that moves in stages. The first stage was my taking on the role and finding a pool of volunteers who were willing to serve. You see those people on the slide here. If you're in the room and you're a voting member of the NOMCOM, will you please stand up? Thank these people. They're in for a tough 6 months. Our job, let's see if I get it to advance. Our job is to fill the following positions. You will note that there is a slot open, as Leslie mentioned, on the IAOC this year. In addition to the traditional IAB and IESG slots, the chair slot is also in play this year. I want to make a couple of short remarks. Thanks to everyone who volunteered to serve. Thanks to those people who checked my code on the random selection process. Huge thanks to everyone who was selected as a voting member. Nominations open August 25th. The cycle closes for nominations October 8th. Your responsibility and what I need from you, from the community, is to give me the best possible pool of candidates for this year's NOMCOM. We have incumbents on the past slide were marked with an asterisk, and if I go back, you will see that we have 6 seats where the incumbent has stated that they will not run again. That's a large amount of change, and I would like to be spoiled for choice. That's it for me.
Thank you. And we'll have another short report. Heather, you come up and talk about RFC editor and formats.
Okay, I'll keep this very, very brief. You all know I'm working on changing the format of RFCs, yes? Yes? Okay. I know it's coming as a great shock. There's a marvelous poster next to the RFC editor desk that describes some of what we're doing. And at this point, the drafts that document the various requirements, the prep tool, the vocabulary, what the HTML needs to look like, what the PDF needs to look like, the non-ASCII characters, the SVG, all of those drafts are now in the IAB's hand for approval for publication. That should happen in the next 2 weeks. I'm not exactly sure when the next IAB meeting is, but that's when it will happen. And at that point, you'll start seeing RFPs come out so that we can start coding. All of these documents will undergo a BIS process. It actually states that clearly in the documents themselves, because we know that these aren't perfect. So I know you all are desperate to implement some of the stuff in here. So when you actually try and implement this yourself and you find things that are not clear, say so. Each document has a GitHub repository. We can collect issues there. Links to that are on the format FAQ page, which you can find that in this slide deck. And I think that's all I'll cover on this one. Thank you all very much.
Thanks. And Lars, can you come up and talk about the IETF?
Hi, I'm Lars Egger. I chair the IETF, the Internet Research Task Force. This is a very short report. There's a longer one that is part of the minutes from the IETF open meeting that was earlier in the week. We had a lot of groups meet this week, 8 of them, in fact, out of the 10 that are currently chartered. Want to quickly highlight there's a joint meeting between the SD Energy, the Network Function Virtualization Research Group, and the Network Management Research Group that will probably be larger than the QuickBOF. At least I'm betting on it. On Friday, so I asked them to double check that they've asked for this particular room for that. Also, there's a proposed measurement and analysis for protocols research group on the bottom here that got chartered yesterday. So those are slightly outdated. We move at the speed of light in the IETF. Already, things have changed. The proposed network machine learning research group, however, is still proposed. Thursday morning, we're going to review the Gaia research group with the IAB. We do this once a meeting, a different group. I'm stepping down in March. This should also not come as a surprise. I've said this many times. There's a call for volunteers. We have 5 candidates that accepted to be considered for this. Stephen Farrell, Brian Haberman, Dirk Kutscher, Alison Mencken, and Colin Perkins. The IAB would like to hear from you about views on who would be the best candidate for the role. The deadline is this Friday, so I would encourage you to minimize the bad attitude chat room for 5 minutes and type an email either to iabchair@iab.org or executive director@iab.org. They will forward your comments to the IAB vote list, and they'll be treated confidentially like NomCom input would be. So deadline this Friday, please give the IAB information. We do give out the Applied Networking Research Prize. We have been giving out for a while now. We're doing this together with ISOC. We had 53 nominations in 2016, which is the highest number yet. We picked 6 of them. 2 of them talked in Buenos Aires. 2 more have talked earlier in the week, Dario Rossi and Samuel Gero. And we get some corporate support from Comcast for that. And Comcast has renewed this for the next cycle. They need not stay the only corporate sponsor. Come talk to me and Matt Ford if you would like to support the ANRP. That allows us to bring back some of the prize winners that have started to engage with working groups in the IETF and give them, more opportunity to influence the work. Also, it's the 5th year that we're doing this. We started at IETF 81, which is exactly 15 IETFs ago, and we're at IETF 96 now. So we have 26 award winners over those 5 years. If you're sort of interested in how you win, these are the academic conferences where you first need to get your paper in. ACM IMC, Measurement Conference, SIGCOM, Usenix NSDI, CONEXT. All of them are very tough to get in. And then you need to also, get chosen, which is a 10 to 15% affair if you look at the numbers on the right. So we are receiving between 20 and 50 nominations every year. The number's going up, which is great. We're giving out roughly 6 awards. That's, I think, the maximum we can do. And so the rate is actually quite low. So it's a pretty prestigious thing. Matt Ford crunched some numbers, and 13 of our 26 winners actually came back on their own money, which I think is an excellent quota. So I'm very pleased about that. 4 of them are here at this meeting. And 11 others, we used some of the funds we have for the INRP to bring them back as well. And we have 1 research group chair that came out of this, which makes me super happy. That was worth it just to get Kenny. We also have another ANR thing, which is the Applied Networking Research Workshop. We're doing this for the first time. We have done this for the first time on Saturday. This is an academic peer-reviewed scientific workshop that we're doing together with ACM SIGCOM and, again, the Internet Society. The intent is that we would do this roughly once a year on the Saturday before an IETF meeting. That workshop publishes open access proceedings of the papers that were accepted for the workshop. in the ACM Digital Library. This is highly attractive to academics. I had one person come up to me and says, you know, I attended the RAIM workshop in Yokohama remotely, but now that you actually have something that counts in my department as an academic citation, I submitted something and I traveled here. So that's exactly what we wanted to achieve. We have two types of papers, short papers and full papers. We got 17 full papers submitted, 9 of them got accepted, and 13 short papers, and we accepted 9. The short papers got a poster, long papers got a full presentation. We're currently planning to do this again in Prague next year. This is not 100% confirmed, but I think that's what we're shooting for. There will be a call for papers soon as we found a stuckey to run this for us. And the INRW also gets support from Akamai, the Cyclops project, NetApp, and is also funded by SIGCOM, the IETF, and the Internet Society. But I specifically mentioned Akamai because they committed to 3 years from the get-go, which is very nice because that gives us the ability to plan. We don't run a profit here. So all of the money that we don't spend on the event itself, we actually use for student travel grants. And I didn't put this on the slide, but should have. I think we flew in 6 or 7 students. I think 2 from India, 2 from South America, and a few from various places in Europe, and had them engage with the researchers. And we hope that they get something out of that and will, come back. And that's me. Thank you.
Thank you, Lars. And next up, I will invite Kathy Brown, ISOC CEO, to come on stage so that we can recognize some of the events that you've seen take place in relation to IETF funding recently. And she's coming up. I just want to say that the IETF funding structure and practice is something that we need to evolve as the world and the IETF evolves at the same time. I made the observation earlier that while most of our work is actually over the internet, and our funding structure and sponsorships are largely tied to meetings. So the meeting fees that you all pay, plus hosting and all of that, that's 2/3 of our funding, and it's meeting based. And it could be good to see that evolve, not maybe overnight, but over time to a slightly different balance. And I'm happy to see the things that Kathy will be talking about because of this thing.
Thanks, Yari. You will remember that the endowment was founded in about, I think it was 2012. It was at the time called the Open Standards Endowment. It is now called the IETF Endowment. It had some early pioneers who contributed to that endowment, which we are most grateful. It kept the endowment alive for a while. Thank you, John and others. I think John and others are here. We have spent some time trying to regain momentum to actually fund the endowment. And today we have some good news around that, which you've already heard earlier in the week. But first, let me say a little bit about the endowment. The aim of this endowment is to provide long-term support to the IETF. Nothing changes with respect to the way that ISOC will support the IETF in its operational mode, as we do today, and as we will keep on doing. This endowment is meant to provide a long-term investment, a little bit about diversifying your revenue flows, where the money collected is seen as principal to an endowment, which grows over time. And it is the earnings from the invested principal that would be used by the IETF for its purposes and for its programs as defined by the endowment itself. Again, the principal is not touched, only the earnings. Okay, so just to understand this is something you grow over time, and it's something that gives you another revenue flow in the future. So today, as I said, I shared with you on the list earlier in the week, we are going to recognize 4 contributions which together constitute an infusion of more than $3 million, bringing the total in the investment now to $3.1 million. So this is, I think, is a very good start. Our goal in the next 2 years, I hope, is that the endowment would have $20 million in it. Small donations of $75 or more are accepted anytime. And shortly, we will announce the next phase of the campaign to continue to seek large contributions. You could go to the website, which you will see in a moment, underneath here, sustainietf.org. Okay, so now, I'd like to recognize those organizations who have made these very generous contributions. One moment, I'm going to call individuals up, but first let me say, Afrinic, Aaron, RIPE NCC, and the Internet Society. So to recognize these contributions, can I ask that Daniel Shaw of Afrinic come up, John Curran of Aaron, Kristen Kaufman of RIPE NCC, and Gonzalo Camarillo, who is the current and new chair of the Internet Society.
So this is very significant. I do want to recognize these folks and their organizations for their generous contributions.
We have a plaque. And ISOC, which we didn't do a plaque, I just did. Thank you. And the board. John, perhaps you want to say a couple words?
Good evening. I happen to work for Afrinic and be here, so I'm accepting this plaque on behalf of my organization. And I just have a couple of lines that was sent to me by our CEO. He says, both Afrinic and our members rely on the open standards created by the IETF and have an interest in the sustainability of the IETF. In particular, we would not have any IP addresses to manage if it were not for the IETF. I'm very proud that we were able to contribute to the endowment. That's all from me, folks. Thanks very much.
Good afternoon. I'm John Curran, the CEO of Aaron. As previously spoke, the RIR community is indebted to the IETF to have the very numbers by which the RIR community operates. And in particular, the Aaron community, we felt it was appropriate that the IETF have an endowment, a source of long-term sustained funding for its work and maintenance on the very protocols that make the internet work. So very happy to make the contribution, and thank you. Keep doing the good work.
Hi, I'm Christian Kaufmann from the RIPE NCC board. So apparently since today the RIRs have a dress code, as you see on John and me. But besides that, we actually brought our own money. The IETF and the RIPE NCC have actually a long history in working together and collaborating on the stability of the internet. If you think about CIDR, IPv6 working group, but also the collaboration during the IANA transition is a good example for it. So the RIPE NCC is quite proud to actually collaborate and help to sustain, help with the sustainability and the future of the IETF. Thanks.
Thank you. So let me, wrap up. As Kathy said, it would have been weird to give a plaque to ourselves. So, that's, So this is a long-term investment, actually, for the IETF. that basically provides diverse income sources. And the idea is to provide sustainability for the IETF in the dynamic environment we are living in, as Yari mentioned before. Our immediate goal is to have 20 million euro, dollars actually. Euros, not very different. As Kathy said, we have 3.1 right now. So in order to reach those 20 million, the idea is to get more donations from both organizations and individuals. The way we're gonna do that, we would like to explain it to the community. Today we don't have enough time, so we're gonna have a virtual session on August 4th. We sent actually the details to the IETF discussion list. We will send them again as the date gets closer, so that we explain the different ways into which ISOC supports the IETF, and also any questions you guys have or suggestions or any input on the IETF endowment. So August 4th, just mark that in your calendars. It would be a virtual meeting. And in the meantime, you can, please go to sustainietf.org and you can do individual donations from 75 euros up. So if you feel like this is a worthwhile thing to do, just please go and do that. Thank you. Thank you. I can't thank you enough. That is very important. And I think next up we are going to talk about IETF 97 with Zhao.
Thank you. Good evening. IETF is the most important standards organization for internet technology community. And also it is one of the most important standard organization for our company. So we started to send our engineers to participate and about 11 years ago, and participated IETF and make the technology and the leadership contributions. There is the other ways that we try to contribute is hosting the IETF meeting. So the last time we hosted an IETF meeting, it was about 3 years ago, and 2013 November in Vancouver. And we are very pleased that we have another opportunity this year to host the IETF 97 in Seoul, Republic of Korea. We also very pleased that we have a co-host, which is the CNNIC, China Internet Network Information Center. And also there's a bunch of opportunities for additional sponsors. There's a big space here for your company's logos. Talk to Ray and talk to Yari for the extra sponsorship. As Yari mentioned that before, that this meeting, the 96, the hackathon is a very success. We have over 150 participating for hackathon, and we will continue sponsor the last hackathon for this year, which 2 days before the IETF 97. And I understand that the weather probably will be a little bit chilly over there, but it's better than Minneapolis. So, and also I want to say thank you. I want to say just a few more words about the hackathon. So I think that's the second year for IETF for hackathon. And as I mentioned that in Sunday hackathon event, and I think the IETF probably needed to at least look more beyond the hackathons, really to figure out how to embrace the open source, how to make the open source and open standard that can work together, that can benefit together. And as a matter of fact, some other organization is already very serious looking at this sort of embracing both sides together. And before I finish, I think I learned some Korean. I want to try. And actually, I looked for a Google Translator, and it gave me a very long things, and I couldn't pronounce. So I asked one of my colleagues, he's from Korea. He gave me a short one. Oh, it's quiet. Day Hum Mingo So Wang Yin Wang Hanita. Seoul, welcome to welcome you to Seoul, Korea. Sorry.
Thank you for that. Thank you for sponsoring the hackathon this year and our next meeting and your thoughts. Next up, Ross, can you come up?
I just advance with these little buttons on the bottom there. Okay, okay. So I'm actually, some of you probably know, I'm going to be retiring in just a few weeks. And there's sort of a little something that's been bugging me for a while. And so I thought, before I retire, I want to sort of talk about it. So I put together a presentation and talked about it in the routing area yesterday. But the problem that I'm talking about really applies to, I think, probably every area of the IETF and maybe even every area of every working, every standards bodies anywhere. So we thought it would be a good idea to present this at the plenary as well. And the thing that's concerning me is that, I think we're making things too complicated sometimes. I mean, you could talk about, laws and taxes and regulations and, ways almost any part of our society works. There's a lot of complexity all over the place, and that doesn't always make things work better. But of course, we can't affect laws and regulations and other stuff. We can affect what we do here at the IETF. Before I get into detail, I want to just sort of point out that the opinions expressed here are my own opinions. They're things that have been concerning me. They don't represent any organization that I might in any way be associated with necessarily. If I'm going to retire in just a few weeks, it's too late for anybody to fire me, so I can say what I believe. We are, of course, seeing multiple options, multiple different ways of doing the same thing. We find, in many cases, there's additional options and additional capabilities being added to many of our protocols. Certainly diversity in approaches, it's inevitable, and in a great many cases, it's valuable. It can be very valuable. But I think we have to be a little bit careful about making too many alternatives and beware of creating so many options that some vendors implement some vendors implement others, and we end up with a lack of interoperability. There's a lot of examples. I probably could pick on, an example from any area if I had the expertise in every area, which, I don't, of course, have expertise in every area. I don't think anybody does. But there's a lot of examples all over the place. I'm just going to pick on one. It's just the one I happen to pick. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about virtual private networks. Virtual private networks have to support private addresses. For example, for layer 3 virtual private networks, there's many private networks all around the world that use network number 10. So you can't just route a network number 10 packet across the middle of your service provider for each of 100 customers that are all using the same addresses. You have to encapsulate it. Over too many beers earlier in the week, I thought of a way you could do it without encapsulation, and it's really ugly and nobody would ever want to do it. So you really have to do encapsulation. We could do it with connections, or we could do it without connections. Right? So with connections, you can do it with MPLS. You take whatever your private packet is, stick it in an MPLS header, ship it across your service provider network, deliver it at the other end. There are 3 ways to signal your labels: LDP, RSVP, or BGP. There are some subtle but important differences in semantics as to just what it means when you get a label with each of those approaches. So there is a reason that there's 3 of them. There are defined OAM protocols, primarily using LSP ping and BFD. So there's ways you can manage things, make sure your packets are getting through, and so on, and measure performance. That's, of course, widely deployed all over the world, supporting a lot of private networks and making money for a lot of service providers. I hope. I think it is somewhat profitable, I hope. Connectionless approaches, you don't really need a connection to support a VPN, right? You could just have a connectionless encapsulation. And there's lots of ways to do it. You could take your IP packet that's in your private network with your network 10 address, encapsulate it in an IP header for your service provider, and then ship it across. Now, when it says IP in IP there's really 4 options, right? There's IPv4 in IPv4, or you could decide you're putting IPv6 in your service provider and encapsulate IPv4 in IPv6, or IPv6 in IPv4, or IPv6 in IPv6. So if a vendor wants to implement, all possible options for datagram encapsulations, there's sort of just the first item there on the bullet is really 4 options. You could also, of course, do IP in UDP in IP. You could do IP in GRE in IP. You could do IP in GRE in UDP in IP. You could do L2TP. You could do IPsec. There's 2 different modes of IPsec. I'm not an IPsec expert, so I won't even try to say what they are. Given all those options, it's very hard to get one of them, implemented and deployed everywhere. So people are using MPLS for their VPNs, but in some cases they don't want to set up connections across the core of their network, so they want to do MPLS over some sort of datagram IP service. So of course you can encapsulate MPLS in IP, except that the switches across the middle of the network might not be able to look inside an IP packet to hash on an MPLS header. And in many cases, your tunnels can be carrying a lot of traffic from, in some cases, a lot of different private networks, or maybe just a lot of different sites inside one private network to other sites inside a different part of the private network. So in order to allow hashing across the core of your service provider network, you might decide to encapsulate MPLS in UDP in IP. And of course, you can use VXLAN. Lisp has been proposed as another alternative to support VPNs. And there's probably other things. And in fact, I realized when I gave this talk yesterday that I missed one, which is, I've seen proposals for MPLS in GRE, in UDP, in IP. I've probably missed others. The problem with all those options, any one of those could, well, I won't say, I'm not enough of an IPsec expert to know whether the encryption stuff could be done, but all of the rest of that stuff could be done in ASICs on, a terabit slot in a router just fine. The problem is, where I've listed IP and IP, when I listed one thing, it's really 4 things, right? So that 10 things I've listed are really probably more like 20 or 30 or 40 approaches. You're not going to implement 40 different ways to do datagram encapsulation in an ASIC, because it just is not sensible. So we run the risk that some places in the world one approach gets implemented, some other places something else gets implemented, some vendors do one set or subset of all the options, and different vendors do different subsets, and you can end up with a lack of interoperability. Now, whether that's an issue or not, I want to take a different perspective. Right, the internet has been called the largest machine ever made. There are billions of computers and billions of users. When I started working on stuff related to the internet, it was doubling basically every 6 months, both in terms of number of users and amount of bandwidth. At this point, we've gotten to the point where we have so many users that we probably only have one more doubling left, because we've probably got about half the human population on the internet already. But we still have explosive growth in the number of applications that are available and the use of bandwidth. Now we're all watching TV shows over basically internet service rather than broadcast, analog TV stuff. There's a lot of different, really explosive use of the internet. As an example, this past Friday, I went to the airport in Boston and got on an airplane and flew here. So the day before that, because I was going to be away for a few days, my family went out to an ice cream place last Thursday night and get ice cream. And this is a pretty big ice cream place. They have like, 30 or 40 different types of ice cream, and they have a putting green or actually a miniature golf, and they have pitch and putt, and they have tents where corporations can have their summer parties. So it's a pretty big place. And we've been there a lot of times, but last Thursday, for the first time, I saw large numbers of people, mostly teenagers, but a few kids and a few adults, wandering all over the place looking for Pokemons. Right? So my 20-year-old daughter, who is 6 feet tall and looks a lot like Maria Sharapova, was talking to, a couple of somewhat, let's just say, teenage boys who look like they'd be comfortable in our computer labs. And, they were busily chatting away about where the best Pokemons are. And then my two daughters went rushing off together, off to where the most Pokemons were. And I started watching this all happen. I was thinking, this is really exciting, right? This is my first reaction is, we've changed the whole world. This would never have happened even 10 years ago. My second reaction was, no one vendor could ever have done this. Not only could no one vendor have ever implemented it, no one vendor could even have thought of it to do it. No one service provider could have done this. Some number of years ago, we were hearing about, we'll have walled gardens where your service provider will give you internet service and they'll do all the applications and they won't really let you out. Well, that sort of went away because there's just so much explosive growth of the way the internet is used. Now, the internet exists because of multi-vendor interoperability and multi-service provider interoperability. When we started the internet way back when, if we had 10 different versions of IP, and one got implemented here, and one got implemented there, and one got implemented in this other country, and one got implemented by a different vendor, this never would have happened. In order for this sort of explosive growth to occur, we need real, effective, well-written, interoperable standards that everybody can implement. You might say, well, what's the motivation? Well, a lot of companies and a lot of individuals have done well by the growth of the internet, right? There's big companies that only exist because of the growth of the internet. And I think we're all better off. As individuals, we're all better off because we have all these services available, but we're also better off because pretty much we're all employed working on the internet, and this growth has helped us all out. It's helped all our companies too. Our companies make money, or at least I think most of us have companies. I know there's a few people from government and a few people from academia, but even in academia, there's more stuff to do research on and more stuff to teach and more stuff to work on because of this really exciting, effective growth. It never would have happened without standards. It never would have happened if we had no choices for how to do something in a standard way, but it also never would have happened if we had 20 or 30 ways to do something. What about private nets? Well, private networks don't have to connect to the rest of the world except, through these VPN services to connect different parts. And also, of course, most private nets probably want internet service. But even for a private net that's not attached to anything else, internet technology has revolutionized the way it works. Inside a private network or inside a data center, you need high-speed switches. You need, name services and so on. The size of the internet, the scale of the internet has driven a lot of investment to drive up the performance sort of at a lower cost. The number of dollars it costs to buy a bit per second in a router goes down. The amount of power it takes to do a bit per second in a router goes down over time. Of course, the bandwidth we need is going up so fast that, the amount of power and money it takes to fill up a room with equipment might go up over time, but that's only because the performance is going up so rapidly. Certainly this internet scale drives performance, and therefore that all gets used in private networks. And again, that requires effective standards. So I believe the IETF needs to sort of be wary of too many unnecessary standards. And I think this is really hard to do. It can't be imposed from the top for at least two reasons. One is if we have a working group with 200 people to say we want to do a standard that looks like this, and they take it to their AD, who's the AD to say, oh, you 200 people are wrong, we're not going to let the standard through? Well, maybe if it's like really broken or totally redundant with something that's widely deployed, in some cases that might be okay, but I think you can't do a lot of it. Probably more important, if you look at all the people in this room and all the people who participated in the IETF this week, whether in person or remotely, the total amount of intelligence and the total amount of knowledge and the total amount of work that we all do together is just completely, totally beyond what any one single person could ever do. So, in some sense, we all have to be somewhat humble, because just look around the room and say, for everything everybody else in the room together knows a whole lot more than that. And so, just a tiny handful of people cannot fix this problem. It's going to take all of us to think about it. And it's to the advantage of all our companies and all of our research organizations and governments and whatever for the internet to be successful and to continue to grow and to continue to have Pokemons poking up all over the place or whatever the next exciting application is. So I'm just sort of asking everybody to think about when something comes up for working group adoption, is it really needed? Should it be done with an existing tool? Do we need another tool? It's a hard process and one that I think we need to think about. So that's all. Thank you.
So don't go yet. I just wanted to say that now that you are retiring, it's an amazing career from IETF 1 to 96 and only a few missed in between.
I've been to 89.
89 meetings. Wow, that's almost. That's almost 2 years of your life spent with this group of friends. And thank you for that, because it's been really good. And I remember you and I served the ISC for a while together, and there's always an impending catastrophe of the week or the month or the year, and you stayed always calm in the face of that catastrophe. So thank you for that. We wanted to give you a plaque as well.
I'm assuming you'll ship this.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, thank you, everybody. And it's really been an honor and a privilege for me to be associated with the IETF over the last just over 30 years. Ray has threatened to kidnap me and take me off to some future IETF, but other than that, I will be retiring soon. And it's really been an honor and a great education. Thank you.
All right, and unless I have missed something, have I? Anybody feeling like they need to present something still? Probably not. So we're going to go to the open mic sessions, and the first one is for IAB. So Andrew and the rest of the IAB, you can come up.
Not really sure. Yeah.
I'm glad we have the black tie wing of the IAB now. We'll be looking forward to the dance recital later. So I am Andrew Sullivan. I am the chair of this esteemed group, and I'm going to start over there, and everybody can introduce themselves.
Lee Howard, IAB.
Heather Flanagan, RRC Series Editor.
Joe Hildebrand, IAB.
Suzanne Wolf, IAB.
Ted Hardy, IAB.
Ryan Trammell, IAB.
Robert Sparks, IAB.
Russ Housley, IAB.
Yariako, IAB.
Ann Thompson, IAB.
Lars Egert, IRTF Chair.
Dave Taylor, IAB.
Eric Nordmark, IAB.
Ralph Drums, IAB.
We are here to answer your questions. So if you have any,
or comments or listen to you rant and tell us how we're wrong. All of these are possibilities open to you, or we can, go away.
Hello? Oh, can you hear me? Okay. Michael Abrahamson. So I don't remember to whom of the gatherings of people I asked like 2 or 3 years ago, but when the crypto was all the things, I asked, how is this going to work end to end, including the human interaction with all of these technologies and making all the layers work together and so on. Did anything happen after that? Like I was talking about human factors and potentially researching this, and how are we going to make this all work together, especially if it's not like a top 5 technology company in the world that has a lot of resources to do this themselves, but actually give advice to the free open source community and so on, and in making sure that you can, I mean, I still really don't have much. I was to send encrypted email, for instance, would throw the layers and all that to make it all fit together, and not have disparate mechanisms that don't fit seamlessly together.
Well, I think it is fair to say that there remain some challenges. We have a privacy and security program. Perhaps the PrivSec folks would like to say something about it.
Ted Hardy. So the work that the IB Privacy and Security Program has focused on has actually been more on how to make the different pieces of the stack work together. So we worked very closely with the Stack Evolution Program and the folks in the transport area. You may have noticed a couple of BOFs from us in a couple of workshops. Marnu was one of the workshops that was on managing mobile networks in an encrypted world. That gave rise to a secondary BOF here called Accord, and it's informed some of the work that's coming up in the Plus BOF tomorrow. So there's definitely pieces of that. There are kind of 2 key pieces of human factors that we might actually really do here, one of which is around key management, which is a difficult problem, especially for humans. And the other is on the much more difficult task of how you make this comprehensible to the folks that are using this technology. What's actually protected and what's not. I think there's been an interesting set of discussions in the news recently about Tesla and how calling their feature autopilot turned into kind of causing people to misunderstand what protections it actually provided. So we've worked a good bit with the W3C. Wendy Seltzer, who's the lead of their ping activity, is also on the privacy and security program. But that part of kind of the presentation layer aspect of it hasn't really been a focus for us.
This is Russ Haslett. I'd like to just add a couple things to what Ted said. We've seen a uptake in some places where people are using more techniques to encrypt email, but it does still remain too hard to get a certificate for at least my mom to do it. And so you should try explaining to your mom what a certificate is.
No, I don't.
Much less how to get one. So anyway, there's a lot of work going on. But at the same time, what we're seeing is more and more uptake automatically. In fact, if you look in the quick BOF that was in this room earlier today, the encryption is just in there and turned on by default.
So one extra thing that I think we have started to make some progress on, aside from the email piece of this, on the web at least, the work that we've done here on Acme and the ability to get a certificate easily, I think has started to actually move the needle. If you look at the amount of encryption on the internet before and after Let's Encrypt went live, you can actually see a change in the slope of the line, which I think is a testament to the work that a lot of folks here have put in time, money, effort, and sweat to make happen. So I'm not saying that we're there, but I think a little bit of progress in the last couple of years has started to accrue.
Try.
Okay, so the email was one example, that's a good example. What about the rest? Are we still, are we satisfied with this, or are we increasing the work here, or what's the future plan?
It seems to me that if we were satisfied with the internet, we would just go home.
No. So that wasn't an answer, but okay.
Well, no, I mean, it was maybe a little glib, but I meant it quite seriously. I mean, no, of course we're not satisfied. It's too hard, and there's no question that it's too hard. I mean, you know, Russ said you should try to explain certificate to your mother. No, you shouldn't. You shouldn't have to try to explain certificates to anybody. But you know, that's where we are. But I think that to be fair, if I look at developments like, for instance, the work that's going on in ACME, you know, we're making progress on it. It's not as fast as I would like, because I would like it to have been done 10 years ago. But you know, there is this trend, because this community works so hard at it, to improve these things gradually. But I also take Ted's point, which is that you know, we're not exactly user interface people. And you know, there may be parts of the user experience that we may not be in a position to influence.
Yes, so that would be another one of my example. Most of the freeware I have that use like XMPP that tries to get encryption right when I'm communicating over Jabber, it doesn't really work and doesn't interoperate, and so that's an implementation issue. But I don't know how to fix that, because even if we do things right here and nobody's implementing it, that is not a walled garden. Like I have plenty of commercial potential where I can go to. A lot of big companies, a lot of good work there, but it doesn't interoperate because it's their client that it only talks to other, like the same brand of phone or whatever. So is there anyone else we can work with to actually get these implementation and the infrastructure that the open source implementers need to have in order for them to actually make this work, to actually get more code out there architecturally that implements the mechanisms we have?
So one of the options here would be to work with the Internet Society, which has a Deploy 360 program, which thinks about how to encourage deployment of useful technologies. They've certainly done a great deal of work with DNSSEC. And if you have ideas for programs that are sort of outreach and educational, either to users or to the development community, certainly you could bring them either through us or directly to the Internet Society.
I was just going to add to that. If you have any suggestions, by all means, share them, right? As Ross said, we're all smarter than an individual here. It sounds like you have something that you want us to do.
I have some suggestions of
easier for us to know what
a
it
little
is.
bit of this. So yeah, so you just send it to IAB as a whole, and then someone picks it up, or where do I send it? Is there an issue tracker I can use, or?
Yes, send email, or you're at the microphone now. You can also just try and summarize it with a short
it'll
thing.
take too long to explain here. I think there are other people might want to say.
Just send us an email and we'll help to disposition it and find a place to get it work done.
Okay, thank you.
So my name's Don Hollander, and I'm not as tall as the others. So Andrew, in your chair's report that you released, you said that there were serious problems in the internationalization area. You expand on what those issues, the serious troubles are, and what's being done about them?
Well, I don't know if the program lead wants to go first or whether I do.
Ted Hardy again. So internationalization has been a program of the IAB for some time, and it's been focused on a couple of different problems. At the moment, it's restricted its focus to how to deal with the fact that the Unicode Consortium, in constructing its character set, has occasionally taken context into account such that visually identical characters may be composed, visually identical glyphs may be composed from multiple character code points. And this is because a particular glyph may be used in one context, for example, an Arabic script of a non-Arabic language, that's different from the context in which it's used in a different language. Language is sort of a problematic construct here, so excuse me for being inexact. But the issue we have is that most of the internet systems, like usernames, passwords, DNS labels, do not come with a context. And so somebody who is using a system that was designed for a context-free operation is left with two possible routes toward resolving that ambiguity. One of which is fail in unexpected ways at unexpected times. And the other is limit, potentially pretty artificially, which of the methods to construct a particular glyph is permissible. Since that turns out to affect different language communities differentially, that's obviously problematic. Some time ago, the IEB issued a statement of concern around this for a particular set of Arabic characters and asked IANA to hold what Unicode version was permissible at 7.3. We're now at 9, and we haven't resolved the fundamental issue. So we're taking another swing at it now. We'd obviously love help, but that's the core of the program's current work.
I should say that we have reconstituted the program a little bit, and we've done some changes to the membership as a result of this very effort. But we had a BOF, I think it was in Dallas, on this topic, and it didn't really yield the results that we wanted. So if you know people who are really interested in this and are willing to spend, either who are really interested in this problem and are, have some protocol chops, but want to spend some time learning about how internationalization is much harder than you think, then please, let us know. And conversely, if you know people who are deeply involved in the internationalization stuff, but don't know anything about internet protocols and want to learn about them, we're also, willing to help. This is actually an urgent problem because most of the people who are not on the internet today and who are joining the internet don't use Latin characters. And the fact of the matter is that it's going to be very difficult to convince them that Latin characters are just fine when they don't have any access to them. If you write from right to left and we tell you, no, now you have to write from left to right, too bad for you, that's not going to go over too well. So we really, there is a sort of urgent problem that as the internet grows, we're going to have to take into account the fact that people write in different ways. And I want to say one other thing, and that is every time we do this or talk about this, somebody, helpfully says, oh, well, the IAB is slagging the Unicode consortium again. I want to be very clear that we're not. This is just a consequence of the fact that the Unicode code points were actually invented for a different problem. And then it turned out that we wanted to use them. And so, there was the Unicode code points. And so we just started using them. And the problem is that they're designed really to capture all of the writing systems in the known universe. And what we're trying to do is write unambiguous identifiers. And it turns out that those goals are maybe not exactly lined up with one another. So this is just hard.
The BOF that Andrew mentioned is was called Lucid, Locale-Free Unicode Identifiers, which was Ted gave the summary of the problem, but if you're looking for the notes, if you weren't there and you want to understand the problem better, go and look for the slides and the discussion of Lucid.
Tom Herbert. If you look at Ross's list of protocols, about half of those, I think, were some form of foo over UDP. Quick is over UDP. So we're seeing a lot of protocols run over UDP. And why is this? Well, UDP does not benefit the end host in this context. In fact, it's overhead. We have to think about how to deal with UDP checksum. IP and UDP, we can send IP just as easily as we could send UDP. The thing is, though, the reason we're doing this is because of middle boxes and switches in the network. They understand UDP and TCP for the most part. So my question is this a concern? Are we going to wind up with an internet that is, instead of being mostly TCP, becomes a UDP-based internet? And it just seems like, in a sense, we're propagating the problem of protocol ossification instead of necessarily fixing it head on. So can you comment on that?
So let me go first, then Brian probably will want to say something after I talk. Number one, I think the problem is not only from middle boxes. I think it's also in the APIs that are available in most common operating systems. UDP and TCP being the most easy things to get access to from a wide variety of operating systems limits us in terms of starting the process of rolling out new protocols. And if TCP is limited in the kinds of things you can do with it, that leaves UDP as the only thing that's left, unfortunately. And then Brian wanted to pop in there.
So I will mention that this is not a new problem. It's just that one of the words has changed. A couple of years ago, we had a very similar discussion, and instead of using UDP, there the comment was replace it with HTTP. Right? Everything seems to be going over HTTP. Does that cause the problem? Yeah, it's basically the same discussion that we're repeating right now. And 10 years from now, it might be something else. But it's just another instance of the same problem that we've been dealing with. The whole stack evolution, previously called IP evolution, has been looking at this issue for many years, and now we're just looking at yes, now it happens to be everything over UDP instead of everything over HTTP, but the waste keeps moving around, and there's multiple wastes and so on.
All right, so and the reason I think it's interesting to move the wastes down is that when you run over HTTP, you're now running over TCP as well. And TCP has some characteristics that are very good for certain kinds of traffic. It's really good for moving a tape from one side of a room to another, which is basically what it was designed for in the very beginning, is we had these file descriptors, and the file descriptors were serial, and the file descriptors were serial because you could have been dealing with serial I/O. It goes all the way back to tape. If what you're not trying to do is move a tape across a room, if you're trying to move it to Mars, or if it's not a tape, it doesn't work as well. So if you're trying to take all of these things that may have different shapes and put them over HTTP, that's not going to work out very well for you because TCP is in the way. The idea of pushing this down to UDP is that UDP isn't in the way in this case. Yes, it's a little bit of extra overhead, but what it does give you is the ability to address not a host, but a process on that host if you're dealing with a host that has multiple tendencies and multiple processes, which is most hosts these days. And it gives you the ability to sort of take these identifiers, which due to the use of NAT in order to have the prolonged deployment of the legacy internet protocol, now means that those ports are actually part of the forwarding identifier, right? Like how that gets treated by the network from end to end is part of that forwarding identifier. So in order to get around that without, we could melt all the NATs, that would be great. We could drink to the universal deployment of IPv6. Or we can recognize that and basically use UDP as a way to get around it. So another thing to recognize is that when you say we're going to run the internet over UDP, what we're really talking about is taking these packets that have some other properties. So the congestion control properties are different, or the pacing properties are different. It's not just the same old UDP. It's just some other traffic that looks like UDP to the lowest layer of the wire. That's the stack evolution view of it. The set of protocols that Ross showed earlier is a completely different problem, right? There, the end hosts really aren't involved. The UDP is a way for tunnels to go over things that tunnels weren't originally designed to go over. There are commonalities here in how UDP then gets treated by the network, because now if you see a UDP packet, it could be an actual UDP packet, it could be DNS, NTP, some application running over UDP. It could be a tunnel packet. It could be a packet using a new transport protocol like QUIC, or with a shim layer like Plus, which also runs over UDP. And there's a little bit of that adds a little bit of ambiguity to handle UDP. This is why we're having handle UDP, or what it means when you see it at some random point in the network. I encourage you to come to the Plus BOF. I know, Tom, I don't actually need to tell you to come to the Plus BOF, but I encourage everybody else to come to the Plus BOF, because we're going to talk there in part about how we can use the shim layer to resolve some of that ambiguity.
So I didn't quite address it. So like you said, Ross's list was about tunneling, and encapsulations. And I completely agree. There are many on that list that do exactly the same thing. And when we do a foo over UDP, that effectively doubles the number of protocols and the numbers of standards. And in that context, the only benefit of UDP is to get packets over the network, get ECMP, and things like that. All the OSs can support that. It's an OS issue. So I know they're interrelated, but I think we need to be careful to lump everything and say it's always going to be UDP. I don't want to run UDP in my data center just for the purpose of getting packets through a firewall. I would much rather that it passes SCTP or TCP or DCCP, whatever I want to use. But we can't do that if there's not some sort of consistency amongst the vendors and the end host and what have you on how to do that. I'll give you one great example. The IPv6 flow label is perfect for ECMP. If we deploy that correctly, this means that any switch that's doing ECMP and has an IPv6 packet should only have to look at the 40-byte IP header to route that packet with ECMP. Should never have to parse over extension headers, shouldn't have to figure out if it's UDP or TCP, or, oh, it's a protocol I don't know, I can't do ECMP. So there are ways to fix aspects of this problem rather than just saying, well, UDP is what's supported and we need to kind of continue with that.
So I'm going to go all the way over here, then here, and then here.
Jana Iyengar. So while it's true that pretty much all internet traffic at the moment does go over UDP or TCP, I just want to remind folks that the internet still runs largely over IP. The fact that we can't deploy any other transport protocol besides TCP and UDP is not a transport protocol by any means, it's a way to build a transport protocol, is basically because of a number of factors, including metal boxes and including in-kernel implementations of things over IP and so on. And everything that's happening is largely a wave. It's a response to the state of the deployed world right now. It's, I don't think it's a problem at all, frankly, because the response is natural and it should have been anticipated by people. This has been coming for a large number of years. It's not brand new just because things are getting proposed now. It's definitely not a new idea. As long as we are able to think about things in a more principled manner and not just in a layered manner, I think that we can make substantial forward progress. As long as we're able to think about functional units instead of just protocols, I think we can make substantial progress. I'd like to point out again that UDP is not really a transport protocol. It is simply a DMUX protocol. The transport protocol is the thing that sits on top of UDP.
Before we go on, I'm going to cut the mic lines now because we've got other people that you're going to take hits at next. And so, like, you know, I got to give them time to pinata as well.
Okay, so I'm Peter Lofberg. So I'm getting a little bit confused. So we are talking about a lot about protocols. So let me talk about how to build a network for a second. Okay, so as some of you know that I work at an operator and we are looking at the traffic growth and it's growing by say 50% per year. And you look at, okay, how would the network look like 2022? What do we need to buy, right? How much traffic would we have? What kind of buffers? What kind of congestion management? How would the dynamics of the endpoints affect my network? What happens with all this new protocol? How does it affect my backbone? Because somehow I have to guess what the traffic would look like 5 years from now, 4 years from now. And I go to my vendor and say, hey, look, I want you to build a box this big that can do this. And at that point, I have to guess, right? So what I've done today is basically, okay, I'm guessing how the traffic would look like. I am simulating all the end systems. I'm simulating TCP. I make an assumption that we have, 6 different implementations. They behave this way. And they have this round trip delays and blah, blah, blah. So you end up saying, okay, the buffers has to be this way, the speed up has to be this way, and the way your VOQ queuing has to be done this way anyway. All the equipment that sits in the core on the internet is going to be replaced 7 years from now. So what's there today is not going to be there 7 years from now. It would be very nice if the IETF had some kind of target where we want to go. Okay, so we talk about all these kludges that are done because of access in the network today doesn't do this, that, and that, and can't do ICMP and can't do this. But okay, how about looking forward? Give me some guidance. Where are we going? If you guys that want to do new protocols can tell me how they actually behave, provide me with simulation data so I can figure out, okay, how will this happen? How will this behave in the future so I can build a network that serves everybody? Because I want to have a network that has no clue what's going on because I can't guess what we're going to do tomorrow. And I don't think anybody here could. So instead of trying to look backwards, let's talk about the future. What kind of protocols will we have tomorrow? What are the requirements tomorrow? Like next generation, when what's out there today has actually died and we have to replace it with something new. Because if you do a 50% increase per year, everybody understands that it's going to be 200 terabits on a box in 2019. It's going to be 45,000 terabits in 2026, right? So it will be replaced. So please make sure we get the requirements into the new things that goes into the internet so we don't build tomorrow's internet based on yesterday's problems.
Stuart Cheshire, Apple. Something I've heard in several working groups this week, and I've heard again tonight, frustrates me a lot. And it's people talking about UDP is something you only use to get through firewalls and NATs. And that really is not at all what it's about. And I'm echoing what Jana said, it's a demultiplexing layer. It should have been in the IP header, but it wasn't, which I think is a design oversight. You look at the IP header, you have the network, the subnet, the host. It gives enough addressing information to get the packet to the host it's going to, and then leaves it there. And in a world when multiple processes can run on a host, you don't know which one it's destined for. So given that that mistake was made in the IP header, you need some way to demultiplex. Even in a world with no NATs and no firewalls, you need to identify where the packet's going. At least for IPv4, where each host has a limited number of IP addresses. If we follow the guidance in RFC 7934 and allow hosts an abundant number of v6 addresses, maybe we can have an address per process, and then the v6 address is enough information to get the packet to the right process. But until we do that, we need some kind of demultiplexing layer.
I just wanted to respond to that real quick. If we had gotten a demux layer that included both TCP and UDP and had the ports in it, we might have also been able to do ICMP and band at the same time, and it would have matched.
Philhan Baker. Yeah, I hear two types of complaint that over the past 20 years I've been coming here. One of the complaint type one is there are these middle boxes in the network and they futz with my packets in undesirable way X. And then the second set of complaints is I'm trying to get my middle box to work and people are creating packets that my middle box can't futz with. And you know what, as an applications person, I do not care about your proxy. I do not care about your middle box. Unless you're running an applications protocol that my application has decided it wants to talk to, I do not want your middle box there. I do not want your HTTP caching. I want to turn it off. I do not want you to redirect me. All I want to do is to get a pipe from A to B. Now, obviously there's NAT and the IPv4 situation, which great. But going to UDP seems to be an excellent way of solving part of the problem. And encrypting the heck out of the packets looks like it's probably going to be the rest. And this is going to be the solution to the middle boxes. We'll encrypt the thwack out of the packets so that if the middle box has only got a binary decision, allow it to work or break it. And that is how it should be, because at the end of the day, this isn't about making UDP work or TCP or anything. It's all about allowing the applications to have the maximum innovation. That's the point of what everything else is about. And what happens on at the IP layer, I don't care, so long as it happens.
Well, 3 cheers for that. Um,
Well, then let me respond.
oh, good. Yes, please.
I'm obviously very sympathetic to the point of view because we all hate when other people break our stuff. That turns around the other way because we keep finding people who build networks, whether they're for their own purposes or to provide services to other people. And those may be networks that provide content or networks that carry bits from one network to another network. And there are all kinds of reasons that people build middle boxes. There's, you named a couple, but there's at least a half a dozen, maybe a dozen more different kinds of middle boxes. And people keep finding new reasons why they want to do new and interesting, well, let's say optimizations. In some cases, it may actually be policy enforcement. Maybe we actually need to take a closer look. We have the semi-report. We may need to take a closer look and see if we can work our way through those. Because I do think that the way you've characterized the problem, that we have this tension back and forth between application and network, is a good characterization of the problem. But I'm not sure that saying, therefore, this part must win is the right answer.
If I may, I'll point out that even though the room will be reconfigured, the plus BOF will be here at 9 o'clock tomorrow morning.
10 o'clock.
Ah, crap. 10 o'clock tomorrow morning.
Wrong time zone.
Don't show up too early. We should probably, though, vacate this room at some point so that they can rebuild the room, though. So thank you very much.
All right, with that, I will close the IAB open mic. Thank you for your comments and questions.
And if I can have the IAOC and Trust up on stage and the IAD.
Okay. No,
All right. I'm still Leslie Daigle, IOC chair. Benson Schleiser, who is also a member of the IOC and Trust, is not feeling well this evening and won't be able to join us, unfortunately. So I would ask you, John, if you would start the introduction.
I'm John Levine, newly appointed to the IAOC.
Ray Pelletier, IETF Administrative Director.
Tobias Gonrom, IEOC and IETF Trust Chair.
Yayako, IETF Chair, and therefore also an IAOC member.
Lou Berger, IAOC.
Andrew Sullivan, IAB Chair, and for my sins, also therefore a member of the IOC and Trust.
Kathy Brown, ISOC, and therefore a member of the IAOC.
Right.
Hi, Lee Howard. I was talking with somebody on online who's not actually here this week, who was curious when looking at the meeting statistics, the demographics. In some past meetings, the meeting statistics have included a breakout of how many women were here. And so I'm relaying a question from remote participants. Do we know how many women are at this meeting?
I think Ray's looking it up. Do we have that information, Ray?
You have the information.
Coming up in a second.
So there are 130. There are 130 attending.
So that makes about 10%.
Oh, so let me just give you the breakdown then. Declined to respond, 114. Female, 130. Male, 1,150.
Okay, thanks, Stuart.
Could you look at the parameters you're...
Could you identify yourself?
Sorry, Stuart Bryant. Could you look at the parameters you're feeding into your cookie consumption estimation algorithm? Because this IETF, there haven't really been any.
Yeah, there might actually be some psychology involved in that too, because I know that as I stood strategically close to a table a few minutes before a cookie break actually started, that there was sort of a wild-eyed urge to just grab as many as I might want without actually thinking about how many I actually wanted. And Yeah. Shouldn't have admitted that. Anything else? All right, we will give you the IESG. Thank you very much.
All right, can the ISG come on stage?
Thank you.
All right, while people are getting settled, Alvaro, why don't you start the introduction round?
Sure. Alvaro Rotana, routing area. Ben Campbell, application in real time.
Brungard, routing.
Joel Yegley, operations and management.
Benoit Claes, operations and management.
Alyssa Cooper, applications in real time. Mia Kulivin, transport.
Terry Manderson, the very suave internet area.
Stephen Farrell, beside the guy in the suit.
And I'm still Yariarko.
Spencer Dawkins. I could be the area director for Quick, but I'm the transport area director.
I'm still Andrew Sullivan.
Suresh Krishnan, internet.
Alexei Melnikov, application in real time.
Kathleen Moriarty, security. Aaliyah Atlas, routing.
Lars.
Hi, Lars Eckert. Just to follow up from the last question to the IOC, I observed that the diversity on the ISG is much higher, which is great, and that means past nomcoms did an excellent job. Thank you for that.
It is perhaps out of turn since the IOC is not here, but I will point out that there was a message to the IETF list today about that very diversity topic as well, and you might want to look at that having to do with IOC committees.
And we are open to suggestions, comments, questions, or dinners also, if there's none of the others.
Michael Richardson. So we had our great too many hours again for available meeting slots problem. And I think it's time to run a bunch of experiments and to do some things, and for some area directors to probably maybe be a little more stringent in approving meetings. I'd like to suggest that every working group gets 1 hour, and that after we've done that, that we can consider whether more time is necessary. But I really like the what were they called? Not the lounges, but the extra rooms. Okay, and I actually think that we should do that more. And I was trying to think of a system whereby you could book your meeting. It would be 9 to 10 a.m. and then you could book that room for 2 more hours. There would be no conflict consideration or anything else happen. So there would be an expectation that at 10 o'clock, half the room would get up and go to another meeting, but that you could now essentially continue working as a smaller team at that point without having to disrupt what you're doing. I think that would require probably 3 times as many rooms as we have now, and would probably be unachievable. But maybe there's some halfway, or maybe there's some experimentation that we could do in that space to do that, because I think that one of the other things about the huge number of sessions and the huge number of conflicts is that we're lacking a great deal of cross-area review that is the purpose of actually being here. And we're also lacking a great deal of opportunity or just exhaustion. Like, I can't go for dinner with you tonight because I just want to go to sleep, right? So I think we're lacking that, and that's actually reducing the value of our in-person meeting. We might as well all just be remote. If you can only go to the sessions that you really absolutely have to be in, then we might as well all be remote because we lack all of that other stuff. And so anyway, that's my suggestion. Start the first experiment with everyone gets 1 hour with as many conflicts as they can think of, and then the rest of the time is we find a way to use up the rest of the time in a constructive way that maximizes the fact that we're all in the same place and in the same time zone.
See it? So I think the something in there is a really good idea. I'd be interested, how many people would prefer more unstructured time? Yeah, so time where people can organize themselves into little groups and do stuff. Well, I mean, we can't do it right now, but I think that would be an interesting kind of concept to try and explore a bit more.
Sorry. And so we had discussed some of this, and inclusivity would be a big consideration, right? Because if you're doing lots of small breakouts, newcomers to a working group, we really have to figure out how we can enable conversations and enable new people to be able to do this work as well. So there's some constraints, and I think this is going to require a lot of thought.
So one of the things that we did at the ISG retreat, which I think could be interesting, is we had, here are some topics, people who actually wanted to get together and talk about them, went into different portions of the room, talked, came back and summarized. And I'm wondering if something like that, or like the unconference, I haven't been to any of the unconferences, so I'm only speculating, but it would be really nice to see some creativity from some of the working group chairs in terms of trying new things, because what's most valuable, of course, is having sometimes those excitingly challenging conversations and getting the right people together. And if we err too much into letting it be self-organized author teams, then we don't always hear the voices that disagree or the new people who actually have a lot to contribute.
Yeah, so a couple of things I think are worth saying about that. None of the people on the ISG that I know of were placed there for their meeting logistic planning skills. So I think that I'm really appreciating the suggestion Michael made. The ISG has been talking about a couple of fairly wild things today, and maybe wilder than what Michael was thinking. But I'm certainly really interested in hearing other suggestions from the community, especially people who have seen meetings organized in different ways at different places, who might be able to give us some ideas. Also worth pointing out that we are having a meaningful conversation about what it would take to do large-scale virtual plenary meetings, which would be more different than what Michael said. As Kathleen said, that inclusivity is an important part of that, and like I say, that's a conversation I would love to see continue.
Robert? All right, so Stephen, your request for who wants more unstructured time, I'd like for you to repeat, not this evening, but frame it more carefully so people know what it is that you're asking for. I think you'll get a much more participation in the response than I think you got this evening. The last several meetings, the IOC and the Secretariat have been working to have effective side meeting space, and they've been increasing it, and people have been taking advantage of it. This week, I've seen a large number of working groups that ended early, which gave more time for people to take advantage of it, and it's a hint to the folks that were organizing those working groups to see if you can guess when that's going to happen and not request so much time. I think that we would benefit greatly from having fewer directly organized meetings, more ad hoc meetings, and it's something I'd like for people to find ways to experiment with. You can self-organize your self-organized meetings. The space is there. Just go do it. You don't have to have support from the Secretariat and the ISG to do it, but you guys should also keep that in mind. But as you're doing so, remember that we do have remote participants. We don't want to cut them out. As we're looking at the technologies to help with these remote participation activities, we need to remember the laptop to laptop case as well as the laptop to big room case, so that when people are doing the breakouts, they can pull the remote people that are interested in as easily as we're trying to make it in the larger sessions.
Right. Yep. So Robert, thank you. I think that's really good. And again, careful framing is not my forte really, but yes.
Yeah, I like the kind of conversation we're having. One of the thoughts that's popping into my mind now, we talk to working groups a lot about, maybe you shouldn't be talking about draft by draft by draft. You should be talking open issue by open issue. And I wonder if there's an opportunity for us to think about that more at the not working group by working group, but are there problem areas that are especially, we in the quick BOF in most of this room, we were talking about stuff today that probably touched 4 different areas. We're not really set up to do that working group within an area by working group within an area. So maybe it's possible for some of the meeting time to turn into, here's a problem we need to work on, but it needs to be a multidisciplinary team. I don't know if that's a good plan or not, but it's different from what we're doing today, and it seemed like it would have helped some of the conversations we were talking about in the quick BOF.
Mark?
Mark Nottingham. So since we're on this topic, it tickled something in the back of my head. Charles. I'm always bad with the metaphors. I think last December, the IESG put out a statement about virtual and interim meetings. And I have to say I was a bit disturbed by that. When we did HTTP2, we did it over a little less than 2 years, and we had 7 interim meetings. We had to keep that high pace up. And I think that was really good for the effort, in that if we'd stretched it out over a longer period of time, we would have had a different kind of participant come. Engineers who have other things to do in day jobs can't dedicate 5 years of their life to an engineering effort. And so that had a serious impact on the quality of the output. Under this policy, would that be an allowable operating mode for a working group going forward? I'm very, very aware of the need to be inclusive, and I agree absolutely with that goal. But to me, the purpose of meeting physically is to get to know people and to socialize and to make sure that you know the people you're working with, so that down the road, when you're having a contentious issue and you're 1,000 or 10,000 miles away from each other over email, you have some sort of shared mind space. You can't get that through virtual participation or a virtual interim. You have to be in the same room. And I know that sucks if you can't be here, but that's the reality of it. So I'm curious to know the intent behind that statement regarding efforts like that.
Benoit?
So the intent behind this statement was actually to give you tools if you wanted to. So it doesn't mean that you have to do everything virtual, but for example, there are documents in their life cycle, they're toward the end, right? And we know the couple of key players that needs to be involved there. And for example, in my NetMod working group, we spend like bi-weekly interim meetings going one issue over the other until it was solved. So this is the goal behind this statement, to make it easier for you if you need the tools.
Okay. I didn't read that from that statement. It seemed like it was trying to reduce the number of interims, not to help. Maybe I just didn't read it well.
I would like to review the exact sentence
Okay.
you're putting on, because I'm slightly confused.
Alice,
at least it was not the intent.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I don't think that was the intent at all. I mean, if that's how it reads, then we should fix it. But I think we want working groups to meet as often as they need to. And I think the thing with face-to-face is that you just need advance warning and good remote support, which is the same thing we do for these meetings. But yeah, I'd much rather see groups meet more often if they feel that that's what helps them progress more quickly. So hopefully that's the message from the statement.
I will be very happy if I've just misapprehended it then. Thank you.
So I don't think you entirely did, because we weren't entirely all of the same mind about this. There is a tension, and you kind of recognize it in your question, a bit between inclusiveness and speed. And I think the ISG are like any group of like 15 people in this room, you could find different opinions.
Lars.
Sorry. Oh, that's all right.
Turning into an old timer because I think this is the record for me to come to the mic here twice. So I like Michael's suggestion to take some pressure off the week in terms of creating opportunities for unstructured interactions. And when Mark spoke, right? So one thing that an area director could do is do the 1 hour thing, and give your working group extra time if it has demonstrated the need for it by having successful interim, virtual or physical, whatever. You can decide what that is, right? Because we have this cadence of only meeting here, but then needing like 5 hours or 2.5. And that might reduce the pressure on the week, and we can use that for some other time. Second point I wanted to make is we're not gonna fix this here tonight, but we now have a working group called Meeting Plan that we can promptly recharter to also consider these sorts of aspects. It has a good name for this.
I like very specific working groups, but we can give you another working group. Joel, did you want
Charles Neville.
Yeah, I wanted to briefly respond to that. I think there's two things that are really interesting about scheduling. One is that between the time that we begin scheduling and the time that people have to post their agendas is about a month. And the actual schedule changes a lot between those two times, in part because there's a bunch of people who don't need to meet and they fall out. And so I think one of the things that happens with the scheduling is that we have 40 or 50 hours that are freed up between the time that we start and the time that we actually complete that. So I think it's a little bit misleading to look at sort of the initial set of meeting requests as the final set. There is a bit of speculation on whether you need to meet or not, and people do fall out. The other part is that we have this sort of interesting experiment that we've done partially to address local conditions, but it seems like the local conditions are not really the big issue in Berlin, but rather what to do with your hour in the morning seems to be sort of an interesting exercise. And it seems like people get themselves organized and they have meetings, and then they go off to their first working group at 10 a.m. as opposed to 9 or 8:30. So I think that is a kind of natural experiment on how we allocate time.
Spencer?
If I could just respond to that. I've seen people complaining on email that because we were starting at 10 o'clock instead of 9 o'clock, they were losing like 5 hours of IETF time. And I've also seen people complaining that because we were starting at 10 o'clock at 9 o'clock instead of 9 o'clock, that people were scheduling 2 breakfast meetings with them instead of 1. So I think a lot of this has to do with not the situation that we're in, but what we do with the situation we're in.
Does one get to eat twice or just once? I'm quite sure who was first, maybe over here.
Charles Neville. I'm a first-time attendee, but I've been to a lot of meetings in my life. A few observations. Meetings that last for more than 1 hour show an incredibly consistent tendency to degenerate. People who are very focused in the first 59 minutes suddenly ramble for their next point, as I'm about to do. I believe that the 10 a.m. start is actually a beautiful sweet spot. The fact that people are complaining both ways is evidence that you have achieved that goal. Free meeting time is very valuable, but a mechanism where it's easy to publish what you're planning to do and where people can easily find it is very important for visibility. +1 to the comment about allowing interim meetings so that a group that needs a lot of work done doesn't have to take up a lot of IETF time, because also +1 to the suggestion that some of the meetings where having the focus explicitly on issues that 3 different groups need to talk to each other about is a very valuable use of this meeting, where you actually have 3 different groups present and they can do that.
Thank you. I at least agree.
And one more point. 10-minute drinks breaks are insane. Give people half an hour to go to the toilet, have a chat, and get their drink before you try and get back into another meeting that should only be 60 minutes long. Otherwise, they'll start waffling.
And we are on hour 3 or something at the moment. And we actually are running out of time in a few minutes. So have a few people left in the queues. Do speak, but be brief.
Thank you. I'm Jim Galvin, and now for something a little different than everything we've been talking about. We heard earlier today, this evening, that about 10% of our physical attendees identify with the gender female. And I just got to watching this room up here and looking up there on the stage, and it suddenly occurred to me, I should first apologize for any unfortunate biases that I might have and assumptions I might make, but it looks like about 30% of our leadership up there would identify with the gender female. And I just think that's a useful thing for us to pat ourselves on the back about. Thank you.
Thank you, Nomcom.
Philhan Baker, yeah. So I've got an action item coming back from this to file a PR, whatever the heck that is, for a working group that's asked me to do something on a thing called a Git. And you know, I've got absolutely no idea how to go about it. Yes, I know how to use Git and GitHub and so on, but I don't know what credentials to use. And when I go to the charter for the working group, I don't find any information that tells me, as a novice who's having their first IETF meeting, what they have to do. So I like the idea of using a source code repository or whatever for this stuff. I think that there's some valuable stuff, but I think that there needs to be some controls around it. And I think that any working group that decides that they want to use GitHub or whatever for their workflow, that needs to be in on the charter page, so that when you can see the mailing list there should be an entry to say where the GitHub is. And there should be a statement that says, this is how you get whatever credential you need. This is who you need to go to get whatever authorizations you need. And finally, and this is very important for me, because I work as an expert witness on patent cases, which, you know, I want to have that complete chain of discussion and all those actions archived somewhere where I can subpoena it if I need it in 20 years' time. So I really want to have the IETF keeping backups of all those Git repositories so that they're in one place that I can subpoena later on, and not rely on, oh, I've got to go and remember who it was, because that doesn't work.
I certainly agree that we do need, like, you know, the working groups will need to point to all relevant materials and methods of access and also history. And obviously, this is a little bit in flux, as you know, we're taking on new things, and those new things will evolve also. Does anybody else from the IST want? Stephen?
So I kind of agree with your overlying point, but I also think that we really should keep the possibility that everybody is Yari at IETF.com or .org, or Yari's password is Yari.
Password.
I don't think we should really go to the point where a primary consideration is some patent litigation somewhere down the road.
Yeah, so we've been experimenting with how to use different tools, and it's been ad hoc with different working groups, trying to trying to share more knowledge, put some of it together into a wiki. There's working group chair training a couple IETFs ago. I think we're still in the process of discussing and describing how to use these tools and make them better available. It is possible very easily on the charter page to put links to things like the wiki or other arbitrary URLs. So there are some of the mechanisms in the data tracker, but one of the challenges is pulling together the individual experience that different working groups are having with using new tools and putting that into sort of a common place that we can all learn from and be able to refer to. It's a really good point. Thank you.
Thank you. And I actually did close the mics, but I just forgot to tell you about it. But we'll do Pat here, and then each of you will get 30 seconds.
Yeah, I just wanted to go back briefly to the issue of meeting time. And frankly, I don't think it makes a lot of difference whether we start an hour earlier or an hour later. I mean, basically, most of us need a certain amount of time to sleep and a certain amount of time to eat. And if we meet for the same number of hours, you know, it may mean that sometimes you have 2 breakfast meetings instead of having a breakfast meeting and a before dinner meeting. But really, there's only so many hours in the day, and as long as we're meeting that many hours, it doesn't make a difference. I think one thing about trying to do side meetings kind of during the meeting time that makes it a little bit difficult if we want to get a group of authors together or something to work an issue in a smaller meeting is that when it's during the meeting time, we don't necessarily all have the same interests. So finding a slot when we're all available is kind of hard. So the idea of having your group meet less and having a side meeting, it doesn't always work because people are running off to different meetings.
Yeah, the starting time and the split between the different purposes of time here this week those are independent from each other. And then the 2 last words.
A question for the previous question, actually. Yeah, let's put all our documents in one repository, and subpoenable by which jurisdiction? Like what are we gonna do then? All of them? What did you have in mind? Seriously, do you want to go up on the mic and say which one you had in mind?
No. Offline.
Yeah, well, we can decide that later.
Lee Howard. I was in a BOF earlier. We were talking about charter, and I couldn't actually see the charter that we were talking about because it was on GitHub, and I was on the V6 only network.
Oh.
All right. With that, I think we're done. Thank you.
Spencer, you're being right. I'm normally red.
Yes, exactly. That's part of why it's really bad.
Yeah.